Is it just me, or has the world gone a little crazy? Because for years now, I've felt kind of radical in my views. And my views seem to be more or less in line with what society needs to rectify the problems that we face right nowadays, or to mitigate them to some extent. Things like wealth inequality, which is one of the biggest problems I think the world faces right now. Those things seem to be ignored for the most part. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But I just want to point out that, my what are perceived to be radical views are, things like what people need to survive. That should come first. That should be priority number one. Profits should be considered a secondary consideration or a tertiary consideration. They definitely should not be considered the primary consideration in a society, in a nation, in the world. Because when you do that, you end up with a lot more problems. And we'll get to that. First off, one of the things that I feel like people look at me as having a radical view in is that I have believed for years now that there should be no billionaires until every man, woman, and child are fed and have all the things that they need to survive in this world. There should not be a single billionaire until every man, woman, and child has been fed, clothed, given shelter, given clean water, given all the trappings that survival requires. Now, as far as thriving, that's another matter. So once every man, woman, and child has everything they need to survive, then you can have a disparity between this person and that person. You can have someone that earns more because they do more work or do harder work or do more dangerous work. Though that's fine. They should earn more money, but it should never be that some people earn more money at the expense of others. That should be the goal, that everybody gets covered. And then once everybody is covered with healthcare, with education, with whatever they need to get through life, then you can move on to allowing some people to have more money than others. Because then it doesn't have a negative impact on people's lives. Right now, the way our system is set up, our economic system is set up for scarcity, and the scarcity is growing by leaps and bounds to as far as its impact on the majority of the people. Now, until we people start realizing that that is not only not sustainable, but that is not moral, that is not the way life should be. We're going to continue to have this wealth inequality because think about it. Decades ago, the wealthiest people in the world and in the country, they held a smaller percentage of all the wealth of a nation or the world. And as time has passed, and these wealthy people have gained more control in politics, and gained more control in those agencies that have control over our lives, they've actually given themselves more money, more wealth, and they've done it at the expense of the rest of us. Because the pie is only so big at any given time. And when you divide it up in such a manner that the majority get a little slice of the pie and a small minority get the majority share of the pie, then you're going to have problems because the majority that has to sustain itself on such a small sliver of the income of the nation, they will eventually turn against you. And that's kind of what's happening. Even though it's listed as like George Floyd protest, all this stuff is bubbling up because people were told to stay home during COVID, which is another example of capitalism failing the citizens of the world, or specifically the United States, because capitalism in America requires that people either choose to stay home and die and from starvation and not having any money to buy the goods that they need, or they can go to work and possibly catch COVID themselves or give it to a loved one, survive, and kill off a loved one, which, that's not a good choice either. So, um, capitalism has been exposed for the immoral economic system that it is. And what a lot of people seem to not realize is that, um, capitalism's problem, the underlying problem, obviously, is money and the scarcity of money for the majority of the people. Now, as that scarcity has grown, like in the 70s, Forbes did a 400 richest people. And in the 70s, they had like 25% of all the wealth in the nation. And then in the 80s, it went up to 33%. And it continues to climb. So the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And when there's going to be a tipping point where the citizens of this nation decide that America is not representative of their values. And then what happens to the nation? Because a nation is only a nation as long as the people of that nation stand behind it. So we have that problem. And then, there are a lot of other things that people don't realize money and capitalism underlie. For instance, the George Floyd racism and the racism of the police. All of that, underlying it is money, because the police they've always been about protecting the assets of those who have the most money. They're always about protecting the status quo for a minority of the citizens of this nation. Why else would the police, kill people so blatantly? They are getting paid to do so. Now, if they got punished instead of getting paid to kill people without justification, then they wouldn't do it. But right now, those powers that be are paying the police enough money so that they will continue to act in the manner that they do. Now, of course, there are some good apple cops, but good apple cops quit because they do not go along with the thin blue line theory and the brotherhood of the policemen and all these other things. So when it comes time to get backup, they don't get backup. I've known a couple of police officers myself personally who have left the police force because they did not play along to get along. And then when it was necessary for them to get back up, their brothers in blue were not there for them. So not only are they harming the public, civilians, they're also harming those cops who are trying to do their job. And, they're just basically the system is just broken. The police system needs to be changed, and defunding the police is one way to do it. There are a lot of other things where you have more community control over the police, because a policeman who goes and works in a neighborhood in which his family does not live is going to care less about those people than he would if he had to patrol his own neighborhood. And what they fail to understand is that some other policeman is actually patrolling their own neighborhood. So if all cops have this mentality of I must go home is job number one, then if you are a policeman in neighborhood A and you patrol in neighborhood B, there's going to be a policeman who is patrolling the neighborhood A who cares less about your son, your daughter, your mother, your wife, anybody in your family. And they're not going to take the precautions necessary or try to de-escalate a situation when their only job is to get home safely, or their job number one is to get home safely. So that's one of the things that the wealth inequality causes. Another one is this underlying racism that's festering in America. To me, racism is a real issue, but it's also being used as a distraction by our leaders. Now, for the individuals who are out in the street, yeah, they're just trying to fight racism straight up. They don't necessarily have an agenda. Maybe some of them do, but like the looters, obviously, they're not really in it to try to change the system. But when your leaders start talking about this racism, and groups that are fighting racism, they start portraying those groups as terrorists and stuff like that. Like Donald Trump, he calls Black Lives Matter terrorists or some derogatory term like that. He basically is trying to kick up the dust so that some of his racist followers will fight against those people as if they're terrorists. And that's what America's leadership has done for a while. Now, in the past, it was black people, which it is again, that are the problem. Black Lives Matter is now the terrorist group. Before it was the Black Panthers, was a terrorist group. And then after 9/11, it became the Muslims who were the biggest problem in the world. Now it's back to black people. Then when Trump was running for president, it was immigrants who were the problem. So all this distraction is pushed onto people who have no control over anything. What do immigrants control? It's like, okay, if Donald Trump believes that immigrants are the problem, then when those immigrants come to America and they continue to find jobs, then maybe Donald Trump should look at the source of, or look behind the immigrants coming to America and realize that there's a reason for these immigrants to come to America. If somebody was paying them to come to America to do work in fields or whatever menial tasks that Americans wouldn't do, then they're going to continue to come. If that source is cut off, that source of funding is cut off for the immigrants, where they make it so that, yeah, immigrants have no reason to come to America, then you would see the immigrants stop coming to America. But instead of Donald Trump and the government going after those people who hire these immigrants to cut off that funding source and the reason for immigrants to come here, instead of that, they just blame immigrants. And the country gets behind them because the country is distracted by, oh, they're taking our jobs. They're not taking anybody's jobs, because if those jobs were able to be filled by Americans at the price, at the wages that those kind of jobs pay, then Americans would be filling those jobs. But that's not the case. Those are jobs that nobody wants. And it's all a distraction. And the same goes with all this racism. There's all these distractions now, and one of the distractions now that I believe, is drawing attention away from, the basis to all of these problems is, the statues. Well, now racist statues or statues of racist individuals, yeah, they should not be a symbol in your country. So they do need to come down. Just like I don't think people would appreciate statues of Hitler being propped up around Germany. So why is that not the case in America? Why has America not gotten it through its thick head that we need to get rid of these symbols of racism? We need to get rid of these symbols of slavery. We need to get rid of these bad symbols that cause people to want to tear them down. They also ignite the fire in those people who believe that those systems and life was better for slave owners and all this other stuff. Whatever their rationale is, that's another story. But it's not true. Countries are not stronger by subjugating certain members of those countries, at least not in the modern world. We should not be subjugating people. We should not be blaming people who have no control over anything for the problems of the country. That's exactly what Hitler did. He blamed Jewish people for a lot of the economic problems in World War II Germany, or pre-World War II Germany. And he got people riled up. And right now, America is kind of going down the same path. It's not to that extent. I don't know if it could ever get to that extent in America. But, maybe it's something to consider. It's something for people to be cognizant of. And the problem that I have with people recognizing this is that people seem to ignore what's going on until it's too late. Right now, they're giving away money to the wealthy in these relief bills. And they're giving some money to distract, the rest of us with a $1,200 check. They haven't had to give us a $1,200 check going on 2 months now, but the bills have continued. And people are, Donald Trump is sitting up there saying that 4 million jobs are created, blah, blah. But yet again, these are 4 million jobs that are going to be filled by desperate people because nobody has work. So if you have desperate people, you have employers who can take advantage of that desperation. And they can pay even lower wages than we were getting before COVID-19. They can have all these gig jobs, Uber, and all these crap jobs that, once they take that stuff away from those people, or they increase the pool of desperate people who want to drive for Uber, you end up getting people who commit suicide. You had the rash of Uber suicides because those people were no longer able to meet make their bills, the ends meet. They couldn't pay their bills because there were so many Uber drivers who were stretching out the pool of the rideshare community to the point where nobody was really making money. It was costing them more in maintenance, insurance, and gas than it was than they were earning in these jobs. And that's how it's going to continue to grow until people wake up. Now, like I said, people need to wake up about this racism, because underlying racism, underlying climate change, underlying all the bad things, the fact that food, the cost of food continues to go up, and the cost of products continue to go up, while the cost of wages stagnates or more likely going to go down. While those things don't make for a good society, and people continue to ignore those things, the world's only going to get worse. And that's where I say it makes no sense to me that I'm considered radical in my views, because the world is screwed up right now, and most people continue to complain about it, but nobody has solutions. And that's why I wrote my book, Solutions. Enough complaining, let's fix America. Because Americans do not look at what's really underlying the biggest problems that we face as a society, as a species. And it's money. The disparity between money for the rich and the money for everybody else is growing. The chasm is getting wider and wider, and it's only causing more harm, and it will cause further harm. So America, please stop considering me the radical in my views. Just because I don't think there should be a single billionaire until every man, woman, and child has food, please don't consider that a radical view, because it's not. It's a more moral view. It's a more just view than what we have right now. Thank you. Join me again for Solutions. Enough complaining. Let's fix America.